Welcome back to GearWire.com. I'm Owen O'Malley, and this guy is the Fender Bassman 59 reissue LTD. The 59 Bassman, obviously based on the 59 Bassman model, a 50-watt all-tube amp, originally intended for bassists, and it has since become favored by guitarists for its sort of wide spectrum sound. It's really, it's very punchy, and it sort of has a wide stage coverage because of the speaker arrangement and the way that the cabinet, well, it's an open back cabinet. There's actually been a number of Bassman reissues. This is the most recent one, and it has a few improvements over the mid-90s reissue in that it's not quite as harsh in the treble, and they've sort of improved the sound of it overall, and the circuit is closer to what the original Bassman circuit was like. So what is that circuit? Well, this is a 2-channel amp with no master volume. Now, it's not a switchable channel amp. There's actually separate inputs for a normal channel and a bright channel, and each of those channels has a separate gain. They share an EQ and a presence control, but there's no master volume. So if you want this amp to distort, you basically need to get it very, very loud. And at 50 watts, this amp gets very loud before it distorts. The good news is that you can get some really excellent clean tones at high volumes. The bad news is that if you want it to distort, you need to get like a THD hot plate or some other kind of speaker buffer to get it to distort at reasonable practice volumes. We're not going to totally crank it here. We're going to try and get it to sort of break up a little bit, but we don't want to get in too much trouble with our neighbors here. So it is an all-tube amp. There's 3 12AX7s. There are 2 6L6s, and there's also a rectifier tube, which is a 5 AR4, I believe. Now, having a tube in the rectifier in most amps actually makes it feel a little spongier. And, sort of like when you drive the amp, it almost like it compresses a little bit, but it's actually not so noticeable, or not as noticeable as on other amps. For example, the Ampeg, the JT20 or J20, the Jet combo, the 20-watt Jet combo. Anyway, this one feels a little bit, it doesn't give quite as much as that amp does, but it still feels like there's a rectifier, a tube rectifier as opposed to solid state. There's 4 10-inch Jensen speakers in here, and that's part of what gives this amp its sort of signature sound. This arrangement and circuit design was actually sort of copped by by Jim Marshall when he started building amps for the likes of The Who back in the early 60s. The cabinet is finished in this beautiful lacquered tweed. There is a rubberized handle up here, and the cabinet is really solid tongue and groove joint pine, which adds to the punchiness and adds to the sort of overall focus of this amp. It's an amp that can be airy and also focused. Now let's take a closer look at the controls up at the top of the amp and listen to how the sound changes. So here's our input section. Now if you've ever played through a vintage Marshall or one of the JCM, Marshall JCM series, this will look familiar to you. You've got a bright channel and a normal channel, each with 2 inputs. The reason that looks familiar is because Marshall sort of cribbed that design from the 59 Bassman. Now, in order to use these 2 channels sort of independently from one another without actually unplugging and plugging your guitar in, you need to get an A-B channel switcher pedal. Now, you can also blend the 2 channels by doing this. Take a little patch cord, go from normal 1 to bright 2, and take your guitar input and put it into bright 1. Now, I'm on standby here, by the way. So this way you can actually blend the 2 channels and kind of get some cool tones that take the best of both channels here. Now remember, they both share an EQ, so you're really just blending the 2 preamp sections. Let's take it off standby. Now, for the purposes of this, we're just going to leave it in this arrangement and check out the 2 channels independently. So here we've got our volume channel, and we're just on the neck pickup of our Stratocaster here. We'll take it up to about 2.5. Take it up a little higher. pick. Now let's switch it to the same volume level on the bright channel. Quite a difference between those two channels. Now, when we've got our sort of channel blending thing going on here, we can actually blend in a little bit of that normal channel. So you got girth and bite with both those channels blended. Let's take both those volumes down a little bit here. And let's move over to the EQ section. So here's our EQ section. You can see we've got kind of an interesting arrangement here. Treble and then bass and then middle. You kind of expect bass and middle to be swapped, but this is how it was on the original amp, so they wanted to stick as closely to the original as possible. So here we go. And now we've got our presence control over here. We've got everything sort of not dying, but at basically 12 o'clock, or between 6 and 7, right in the middle of their spread. And that's the sound we get. Let's turn the presence all the way down. You can hear it still has quite a bit of bite to it. Part of the reason for that is that we've got the bright channel on. Let's take bright down a little bit and pump the normal channel. Let's bring the middle up and cut out some of this treble. It's a nice, warm, tubey clean. It would make for a good jazz amp at these settings. And remember, we're on the neck pickup of our Strat. Let's just hear, though, how bright this amp can get. And it gets very bright. Let's favor the bright channel. Not too pleasant, but you know, good for some funk tones maybe. Let's go to the bridge pickup here. You hear a lot of click coming out of this amp, and that's kind of great for country tones. Really kind of, that click really cuts through a thick mix. Let's switch guitars here just to hear what a Les Paul sounds like through it. So now I've got a Les Paul plugged in. We've got our volumes both just nudging towards 5. And with a Les Paul, you really start to hear some breakup. Now you'll hear it's not a very modern distortion sound. It's a very sort of vintagey, bluesy kind of distortion sound. So check this out. Now that was with the bridge pickup. Let's just play the neck pickup real quick here. Very, very bright. Quite a bit of bite on there, and my treble is down to about 4 here. You know, maybe about a third of the way up. So you can hear this is kind of the distortion here is good for sort of a bluesy, almost a B.B. King-ish kind of tone. Not really modern distortion sounds, but still pretty usable and musical tones coming out of this guy, and it's loud as hell. That was the Fender 59 Bassman Reissue, the LTD reissue, which is the most recent incarnation of the Fender Bassman amp from Fender. It retails for about $1,400. So it's an investment, but it's a pretty pretty cool, unique sounding amp, and a very popular one for Fender still. You've been watching GearWire.com, and I am Owen O'Malley. See you around.